We generally refer to this as the American dream, and I am among the luckiest of American dreamers. My parents were immigrants from Greece who arrived in this country, age 17, with pennies in their pocket, a third-grade education, and not a word of English. My father worked and saved and worked and saved until he had enough money to open the inevitable Greek diner. It wasn't distinguished for its cuisine, to be sure, as for the fact that it was open 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It didn't close for 25 years. In fact, when my father finally decided it was time to slow down, he had to find a locksmith because he realized he didn't even have a key to the door. Though my father would not have been familiar with Thomas Jefferson's writings, he did share a passion with Jefferson. They were both ardent believers in the power of education. My father once told me the best thing he could do for me was to provide, quote, the best education money could buy. He fulfilled that promise and gave me the opportunity to live the American dream. Near the conclusion of my business career, I received a huge financial windfall that prompted me to think about what I should do with it. I was reminded of the story involving two authors, Joseph Heller and Kurt Vonnegut. Heller and Vonnegut were at a party given by a wealthy hedge fund manager at his majestic beach house in the Hamptons. Vonnegut looked around and asked Heller, "Joe, doesn't it bother you that this guy makes more money in a day than you made from worldwide sales of Catch-22? Joe thought for a moment and said, "No, not really. I have something this guy doesn't have." Vonnegut asked, "What could he possibly have that he doesn't have?" Heller responded, "I know the meaning of enough." In deciding what to do with the bulk of my resources, I turned to an issue that has haunted me for years: the ballooning fiscal imbalances that threaten our long-term future. I started the Peterson Foundation to build awareness of the perilous state of our national finances and to try to drive solutions to our fiscal challenge. I chose this path because I honestly believe the American dream is at stake. If we continue along our current path, we run the risk of leaving our children and grandchildren, people in Xander and Bo's generation, with debts that are simply unsustainable and taxes that are simply unthinkable. Debts and taxes that will one day ask them to wonder, what in God's name were we thinking? Based on my reading of Jefferson, I think he would have supported this endeavor. He thought deeply about the responsibilities that one generation bears to the next. He worried that his personal debts would be a burden to his beloved children and grandchildren. And he wrote passionately that one generation of Americans should not bind its successors to debts accumulated before their time. In a letter to his great friend James Madison, he famously wrote, "The earth belongs always to the living generation. Succeeding generations are not responsible for the preceding." Jefferson thought that because the United States was a new nation, with a future of its own making, its leaders were in a unique position to end the cycle of debt that had burdened countries in Europe. "We do not owe a shilling," he once said, "which may not be paid with ease within the time of our own lives." Unfortunately, 2 years later, we Americans have become the world's largest debtor nation. But I am hopeful that we can change that in Washington, and as more and more of our elected representatives are acknowledging the fiscal challenge and thinking about how to solve it. So much of the discussion has been about the grim deficit numbers of the current year, but our transcendent problem is our unsustainable long-term path, the next 20 to 30 years and beyond. Our publicly held debt is currently more than $9.5 trillion, or about 65% of our gross domestic product. But most economists think it is unwise to have debt to GDP above 60%, and above 90%, they believe the risks are critical. Now, without any changes in our current trajectory, America's public debt is projected to rise to 87% in 2020 and a stunning 233% in 2040. And these grim numbers do not include tens of trillions of dollars in off-the-books, unfunded promises for Social Security, Medicare, and other programs. Promises the government has made but not provided for. If any public company tried to use this off-the-book accounting method, their executives would be in serious trouble. Furthermore, half of our debt is owned by creditors in other countries, and this foreign-held debt is growing geometrically and dangerously. Our interest payments help their economies, but buy us nothing and cry out critically needed investments. In 25 years, our interest cost as a percentage of the economy will be 3 times what the federal government spends today in total on education, research, and infrastructure combined. So if we're really serious about being the investment and innovation economy that everyone talks about, we better start asking, with debts and interest costs like these, where will we get the resources? This is not a sustainable or healthy course. Herb Stein, an economist and humorist from the Nixon administration, used to say, if something is unsustainable, it tends to stop. He also said, if your horse dies, I suggest you dismount. Ladies and gentlemen, the horse looks like it's on its last legs. So 2 major factors are contributing to our fiscal mess, our demographics and healthcare costs. The demographic challenge is this. The number of geezers like myself is rapidly rising as a percentage of the population. As the 78 million boomers retire, the percentage of Americans over 65 will increase by 50%. Demographically speaking, by 2030, we will look like a nation of Floridas. The challenge is even more acute when it comes to health care. Medicare and Medicaid today account for more than 20% of the budget, but the number will increase to 30% in coming decades as older people live longer and consume ever more health care. The number of workers paying for these benefits is dwindling. Shortly after Social Security was created, there were 17 workers for each Social Security recipient. In 2030, there will be just over 2 workers for each retiree. And if we do nothing, the payroll taxes on today's young people, on Bo and Xander's generation, will have to pay for cover the projected growth of Social Security and Medicare over the course of their lifetimes. The tax rates would have to double. This would be downright immoral. When I cite statistics like these, I often get labeled as a Scrooge who wants to slash benefits for needy old folks and leave them out in the cold. The truth is, I want to make sure that every senior who relies on Social Security, I'm not nearly as concerned about the senators, excuse me, who relies on Social Security and Medicare can depend on a secure system, which means that the better off, like many of us, will need to reduce our benefits and start contributing our full share to keep the safety net strong. If we wait for the inevitable crisis The politics and the financial realities will be brutal, and no part of the safety net will be secure. Our whole economic and tax system is based on the notion of fairness. We confront a situation where people with middle and lower incomes feel very frustrated, frightened, and angry. They are deeply bothered by the historic inequalities of income between the poor and the rich, who are getting ever richer. So if we're to have the broader public accept the shared sacrifice that our crisis requires, we will need to convince them that those of us who are better off financially are bearing our full share of the sacrifice, whether it be through benefit reductions or tax increases. Some people in Washington are thinking about the long-term solutions. Two great Americans, Erskine Bowles and Ellen Simpson, a Democrat and a Republican, chaired the President's Fiscal Responsibility Commission. They put together serious options to reduce deficits by as much as $4 trillion over the next 10 years and put us on a sustainable long-term task. The so-called Gang of Six in Congress, which includes your Senator, Mark Warner, is driving a new effort to put some of these recommendations into law. Leaders like Senator Warner deserve enormous credit for having the courage and determination to confront this problem head on. Outside groups are also bringing forth ideas. At the Peterson Foundation, we want to hear more good ones. We have provided funding to a half dozen organizations across the ideological spectrum to put together their credible plans for assessing America's fiscal challenges. For it is time to move beyond wishful thinking and develop solutions based on reality. Two principles should guide us. Everything should be on the table, including changes to both spending and revenues, and we need to act sooner rather than later. Denial and delay will only make our problem worse. I am confident we can solve this challenge. From Jefferson's time to our own, Americans have risen to the occasion and met every challenge, but it will take leadership and commitment. Leadership from elected officials and others who have a platform to educate the public, and a commitment from all of us. A commitment to understand these challenges and to support those who are willing to make the tough decisions to solve them. To the students in this audience, I urge you to get involved. Learn about the problem. Join the search for solutions. Because after all, it is your future that is at stake. You may remember the story of the professor who asked his class to explain the difference between ignorance and apathy. One sleepy kid from the back said, "I don't know and I don't care." Trust me, young people, if you were to know more about the crisis ahead, you would care. One day I would love to see an organization called the American Association of Young People, AAYP, leading a march on Washington. 100,000 students and their parents saying, "We're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore." And to those parents and grandparents and other adults who are thinking about your own legacy, consider the words of the German philosopher and theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who once said, "The ultimate test of a moral society is the kind of world that it leaves to its children." The moment is long overdue for us to become moral and worthy ancestors to Jefferson and his fellow founders. Let us all commit to leave our children a country that is fiscally sound and economically strong, a nation posed to inspire the world for many generations to come. Thank you all very much.